A very warm welcome to everyone. The webinar titled Comparative World Literature is hosted by Hindi University, and this is a part of our ongoing efforts to foster intellectual dialogue and explore the unifying power of literature across the world. First of all, it is my great pleasure to welcome the chairperson of today's webinar, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Hindi University, Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am. Welcome, ma'am. And now it is my privilege to welcome our distinguished speakers, Professor and renowned author Dr. Anita Nahal, ma'am, and writer, critic, translator G.J.V. Prasad, sir. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome, sir. Now it is my great honor to introduce Honorable Vice Chancellor of Hindi University, West Bengal, Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, who is a distinguished academician, poet, and writer. With a remarkable academic career, she was previously the director of the School of Foreign Languages at IGNOU New Delhi. A prolific writer, Professor Sahu has authored 21 books, making her a best selling author on Amazon. Her academic excellence is underscored by double gold medals in both graduation and post graduation. She has received the prestigious Literary Award Gold Medal from the Honorable Vice President of India for her understanding contributions to English studies. Professor Sahu's impressive accolades include Michael Madhusudan Academy in 2024 and Lifetime Achievement Award in 2024 as well. As a professor of English, her research interests encompass new literatures, children's literatures, folklore and cultural studies, American literature, Hindu studies, Indian knowledge systems, comparative literatures, and many more. Now, I would like to request Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am for the inaugural speech. Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am.
Thank you so much, Paramita, and Namaskar, Professor G.J.V. Prasad and Professor Anita. I welcome both of you to this very important lecture series from Hindi University West Bengal, Comparative World Literatures. You will be glad to know that as of now, almost 30 eminent speakers, including the two of you, have contributed to this lecture series. They have spoken on various topics related to the theory and the praxis of comparative world literatures, and a couple of speakers have already spoken on the nitty-gritties of translation. And today, I understand that Professor G.J.V. Prasad is going to enrich us by adding more important points to the theorization and the practice of translation studies vis-a-vis comparative world literatures. I welcome you, sir, and the country knows about your contribution. You are one among the best known professors in India and otherwise, and you have been one of my mentors. During my growing up years, I have learned so much from you, listening to your lectures, reading your research, and then referring to your research in my classroom teaching as well as my research. I have been hugely benefited by you throughout. And apart from that, your affectionate and your full of love approach to all of us, youngsters, scholars, it has been something to emulate, something to follow. And you have been a role model for each one of us. And I am very happy and very fortunate to be having you today as a part of our comparative world literature series. A warm welcome to Professor G.J.V. Prasad. And as far as Professor Anita is concerned, I met her a few years ago on Facebook, on internet. She was inviting poetry from the contemporary Indian and English poets for some anthologies. She has edited quite a few very interesting anthologies on Indian English poetry. And when she invited poems from me, I sent her. Then we started a dialogue. And I got to know that we share similar interest in many subjects like culture studies, creative writing, mythology, and very, very contemporary issues vis-a-vis Indian literature. And the sharing of the common ideas and also sharing of a sisterhood led us to where we are today. We have been working together in many projects, including this Hindi University lecture series. And I feel very happy to host Professor Anita today in Hindi University. And for the audiences, for the participants in the webinar today, I must put it on record that Professor Anita is one among the most established writers in diaspora literature scenario. And we love to call her Indian writer in English, but also she is a very prominent writer in the diaspora scenario. Paromita is going to introduce both of you formally. She will read out the important books and contributions that you have made. What I spoke now was from the core of my heart about my feelings and my respect for the two of you. At the end of your lectures, I will definitely try to interpret by giving a couple of critical comments or maybe a couple of critical questions for both of you. We will wait for that, but now I request Paromita to introduce both of you to the lecture series and to the participants. Once again, a very warm welcome to Professor G.J.V. Prasad and Professor Anita Nahal. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And now I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Anita Nahal, ma'am, who is a distinguished Indian American academic, poet, children's book author, novelist, and short filmmaker too. A two-time nominee for the prestigious Pushkar Prize in 2022 and 23, and a finalist for the Tagore Literary Prize in 2023 as well. Dr. Nahal has garnered international recognition. Her poetry prose novel, Drenched Thoughts, earned her the Nissim Prize in Literature in 2024. Her third poetry collection, What's Wrong with Us Kali Women, is a required read at Utrecht University. Dr. Nahal's short film, Club's My Sinful Dance Muse, won Best Super Short Film at the Five Continents International Film Festival in Venezuela in 2024. As the daughter of Sahitya Academy Award winner and renowned novelist Dr. Chaman Nahal and educationist Dr. Sudarshana Nahal, Dr. Nahal has built an illustrious career. A Fulbright and NIH scholar, she previously taught at Sri Venkateswara College, New Delhi, India, and currently serves as a university professor in Washington, D.C. Now, without any delay, I would request Dr. Anita Nahal, ma'am, for an enlightening lecture focused on a short global survey of poetry and women's consciousness. Madam Dr. Anita Nahal.
Thank you so much, Paramita, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Dr. Nandini Sahu. You have been a dear friend, even though we have not met. So I'm delighted and honored to be here and in the company of Professor Prasad. So thank you so much for your invitation. So give me just 1 second. I'm going to share screen and hopefully it will come up again. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can see that. Yes, it's
I am not able to make it bigger. So I hope it's okay.
It's
Oh, wait a
visible, ma'am.
minute. I think I can. No, I cannot. Okay, so I'm going to turn my video off so that I don't see two screens. And I'm going to. So my presentation today is a short global survey of poetry and a woman's consciousness. How do we turn the pages in this?
I think you can scroll down.
Oh, just scroll down.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So in the beginning, at the onset, I wanted to draw a distinction between the notion of a stream of consciousness and consciousness. So some of the questions to keep in mind is what exactly is a stream of consciousness in writing? And we know a stream of consciousness is primarily a technique where and a very powerful and effective technique which mimics a writer's thoughts. There are many who question whether a stream of consciousness is problematic in the style of writing. It sometimes can lead to monotony or flatness of characters, voices, or it is confusing for the readers. And of course, I mentioned a few authors who do tend to write in the stream of consciousness style. For example, Virginia Woolf, Sylvia Plath, Toni Morrison, William Faulkner, just to name a few. Now, talking about consciousness, I really want to, take a couple of seconds here. By training, I'm an historian, and when we go back and look at history, we tend to study the way leaders or people from the past made decisions. What was going on in their mind? What were they thinking about or dreaming about? So I wanted to bring that point here when we are talking about writing. What is consciousness in writing? Are we conscious in our dreams? What happens to us during our REM period? A couple of times during the night we slip into REM. When and what happens to us when we are awake and fully conscious? How much of that do we imbibe into our writing? Many writers and poets, because I'm focusing on poets, have a consciousness, if not a stream of consciousness, that reflects in their writings. So, talking about women specifically, there are some just couple of questions I'm throwing out. These are not inclusive, but just a couple of questions. What do women think, talk, and write about? What are women's thoughts concerned with? What are women's stories? Is there one story or multiple stories? Local, national, and global, what kind of stories do women tell? Who is telling women's stories? Are they telling themselves or someone is telling them? For whom are those stories being told? How does poetry assist in a woman's consciousness? Is poetry political? And is woman's poetry feminist? Is feminist poetry anti-male? So just a few questions. I'm not responding to these questions, just throwing them out for us to ponder upon. I have this quotation here from a very young researcher, Himanshu Datta. I think he is currently in Saint Stephen's College in Delhi. I really like this definition. Literature enables an engagement in dialogue with oneself and with others, which renders possible the fostering of a consciousness within the writer, while also reaching a wider network of women through their work. Of the many cultural products, literature becomes an important means through which women can renegotiate essentialist notions of femininity, using language and their choice of form to create spaces of self-expression and arrive at subjecthood. So, what do women writers really talk about? This is not an extensive list. This is just a short list of a thematic consciousness. Women can be writing about nature, environment, ethnicity, race, caste, love, war, home, family, health, age. To skip over a few, of course, writing about women, gender, skin color, immigration, diaspora, violence, LGBTQIA, human emotions, patriarchy, death, freedom, relationships, religion, culture. And this is again just a very, very minute list, I would say, because women and men, of course, also write on any number of topics that appeal to them. And writing is, of course, and I begin this with a very simple definition here because of the writers that I'm going to speak about. Writings that we write about are from our lived experiences, autobiographical or confessional, and imagined. That's where dreaming comes in. Writers like Sigmund Freud very strongly about how he used dream as a device and how he inculcated that in his writings. Even Mary Shelley's book, Frankenstein, is actually known to have been inspired by a dream she had. So, imagined experiences, then observational. And of course, we are influenced by times in which we exist. And we are influenced by our own personal and professional or private and public spaces that we exist in. These are some of the writers that I'm going to talk a little bit about. I know I have about 30 minutes, and Paramita, do let me know when 5 minutes are left, but hopefully I'll finish before that. So, since I'm trying to give a short survey, I've chosen a few writers who are very different from different walks of life, different ethnicities, to just draw out as to what consciousness that I see in their writings. Someone else could see it very, very differently. We know writing and interpretation is subjective. Let's begin with Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley is an African American poet. She existed in the time frame of the late 18th century. And she was actually born in Africa, and she was taken to America at the age of 7 as a personal companion to Mrs. Susan Whitley. And her husband was a tailor and in Africa. And so Phyllis Whitley came as a slave to the United States. She's the first well-known African American poet. And she was a controversial figure at her time because the Black community, and much later also, interpreted her as having a lack of race consciousness in her poetry. They considered her poetry to be race neutral. But recent scholarship has shown or revealed hidden missives about slavery, about a consciousness of being in a condition of servitude, also of being a girl, a young girl torn away from her family. So slavery, abandonment, and need to survive and thrive and compromise are what are the themes that are part of her consciousness. Just to read out a few lines from one of her poems. But how presumptuous shall we hope to find divine acceptance with the Almighty mind? So I'm going to let you read. I can share the PowerPoint later. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read all portions of all the poems, but I'm going to skip through. Let virtue reign and then accord our prayers, be victory ours and generous freedom theirs. So it can be interpreted, whose freedom is she talking about? Whose victory is she talking about? Jumping many decades later on to Emily Dickinson. She lived in the time period of 1830 to 1885 or 86. Only 10 of her poems from her, I think a total of 1800 poems were published during her lifetime, only about 10. Her poems are short, direct. They deal with hope and death, also depression. She uses a lot of rhyme and capital letters, but there is no one format in her writing. And that was the main expression of her consciousness, speaking about patriarchy, speaking about depression. She could have been a lesbian. She had hypertension, high blood pressure. The death of her brother and parents and nephew greatly influenced her consciousness, and therefore the emergence of death and hope in her poetry. So this is a poem of hers. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Let's move on to Frances Ellen Watkins. She's an African American poet who lived in the time period 1825 to 1911. She lived in Baltimore, not very far from where we live, but an hour's drive from here. And she was also a novelist, not just a poet, a short story writer, and an activist of that time. She was an abolitionist, a suffragist, and she co-founded the National Association of Colored Women's Club. She spoke a lot about women's rights, about especially during the post-Civil War period, and she worked in the Underground Railroad network, like did Harriet Tubman. So her consciousness is about race, slavery, freedom, and women's rights. Lines. At the portals of the future, full of madness, guilt, and gloom, stood the hateful form of slavery, crying, oh, give me room. Charlotte Perkin Gilman lived in the time period 1860 to 1935, a poet, novelist, a social and political reformer, an activist, a white writer. And she was born in Connecticut. She worked a lot in the women's suffrage and the right to work and also financial freedom. She was called by some as America's first feminist, among others of that time period being Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So she ranks in the same group of women in the 19th century. Her consciousness dealt with women's rights and suffrage. Sometimes her poems are very hard hitting, for example, against women who did not protest. So, for example, she writes in this poem to the young wife, "Are you content, you pretty 3 years wife? Are you content and satisfied to live on what your loving husband loves to give and give to him your life?" So, very clearly, she's drawing out that perspective of challenging young women to come out of the house and to work in the activist movement of the 19th century. Next, a few minutes on Sonia Sanchez, of course, well-known African-American writer, lived in the period 1934. She's still alive, actually. She's 89 years old, born in Birmingham, Alabama. So the seat of civil rights movement in the 19th century. She talked a lot about Black identity, love, community, Black empowerment, women's strength. She was deeply influenced by Langston Hughes, a famous African American writer. And so her consciousness was about Black identity, especially Black women's identity. This is a poem. It's called "This Is Not a Small Voice." This is not a small voice you hear. This is a large voice coming out of these cities. This is the voice of Latanya, Kadesha, Shanique. This is the voice of Antoine, Daryl, Shakil, running over waters, navigating the hallways of our schools, spilling out on the corners of our cities. So direct, naming some of the people who might have been either killed or lynched during the civil rights movement. Coming to Sarojini Naidu, of course, famous Indian poet, writer, activist of the late 19th and 20th century, the Nightingale of India. So her consciousness is really about women's rights. She talked a lot about women's upliftment and being involved in the national movement. Here she addresses sati, which the British did abolish in the 19th century, but which carried on. And it was not something that was general, which is a misgiving, especially in the Western world, that sati existed all over India, which is not true. It existed in parts of Bengal and in Rajasthan. Sati, lamp of life, the lips of death, hath blown thee out with their sudden breath. Naught shall revive thy vanished spark. Love, must I dwell in the living dark? You will see that she tends to use a lot of traditional Old English in her poetry. Coming to Frida Kahlo, I wanted to touch upon some writer from the South American continent. She's a Mexican writer, lived in the period 1907 to 1954. She had a short life. She was primarily an artist, a painter, and but she also wrote poetry, and she wrote a lot on gender, class, and race. She also wrote love poems, and her love poetry and her paintings and her writings overall showed a love that was quite unrequited. um, Sometimes a poem of hers would accompany her paintings. So her consciousness of women, of gender, mental health, identity in a man's very artistic world. Because as an artist, she had a very tough time in creating a position for herself. She was, to some extent, a surrealist painter. This poem is untitled, and it goes, "I'm not going to ask you to kiss me, neither ask for forgiveness when I believe that you have done wrong or that you have made a mistake. Nor am I going to ask you to hug me when I need it the most, or to invite me to dinner on our anniversary." Clearly, she's writing to her husband. I think his name was Diego. "I'm not going to ask you to go around the world to live new experiences, much less ask you to give me your hand when we are in that city." This poem, I think, came shortly after she accompanied her husband to New York City, and she found the city very bustling and vibrant, and she painted quite a few paintings in that city. But of course, she couldn't really find herself, and this poem comes from the lack of her connection with her husband. I'm going to end with Rupi Kaur and just a bit about myself. Rupi Kaur is a very young poet. She's born in 1992. She's originally from Punjab, her family, and she lives now in Canada. Many writers, especially from the traditional literary world, do not regard her as a writer. And I think that's kind of an elitist view because writing is very subjective. You know, we can love someone's writing and dislike, someone else can dislike our writing very much. So I like to encourage different kinds of voices, especially younger voices, because why not? If they are making a mark and they are telling a story, then it is in our duty to encourage youngsters coming after us or anyone else, and to create what is called succession training or some succession development. So she writes a lot about love and loss, and abuse, a lot of sexual abuse that she herself went through. Her consciousness is of feminism, immigration, and gender abuse identity. So this one short poem, her poems are generally very short, and she also makes her own pencil line drawings with her poems. In an ideal world, he placed his hands on my mind before reaching for my waist, my hips, or my lips. He didn't call me beautiful first, he called me exquisite. And I found this poem particularly revealing because many of my poems also talk about that. And, you know, coming to my own writings, I'm primarily a prose poetry writer, and I write a lot about women. Not I talk about abuse, I talk also about this skin color and racism, ageism, unemployment, single motherhood. And I talk a lot about how some men, no generalizations here, some men tend to pedestalize women and call them exotic and exquisite, primarily for their own benefit. So this is just a poem, few part of my poem. I'm just going to read some lines. It's from this book, What's Wrong with Us Kali Women. There's nothing wrong, nothing wrong. That's your fear labeling us. We are the Kali women and all other female, male, androgynous gods. I think there's a word missing here. We don't distinguish, we seek, we learn, comprehend, embrace. We are the Kali women in the forefront, striding and yes, strutting our stuff too. Some men gulp and gawk. They are the same who have been bowing before Kali's statues for centuries, marking their foreheads with mitti from her robes, and then they call her Ma Kali and walk away brash, brazen, evil. And so the poem goes on. There are so many other writers I'm not touching upon. Writers Nandini Sahu herself, Vasudhara Roy, Lakshmi Kanan, Sukrita Paul Kamor, Vanita Agarwal in the diaspora, Usha Akela, Megha Sood. There are so many writers, Pramila Venkateswaran, Kashiana Singh, Sophia Nas. So there are so many women's writers that I would like you to think about and write their work. But just to conclude, that what I wanted to emphasize on, and I hope that after this you will write your own poem and think about a woman's consciousness in your poetry. And these are some of the things you can keep in mind when you are trying to write your poem. What is your poetry going to be about? What is your theme? What is the story you wish to tell of yourself or about a woman in your life? A mother, sister, wife, partner, daughter, grandmother, or a friend? What will your poetry be influenced by? Realism, surrealism, personal, observational? And in what style will you write your poem? And make a mark in that. Free verse, rhyme, prose poetry, or haiku. Thank you so much. I hope I was within the time limit. Oh, I see that I'm exactly on time. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for such a thought provoking and inspiring lecture. Now, I would like to request Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, for her valuable remarks. Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am.
Professor Anita, it was absolutely engaging lecture that you delivered, and you kept the spirit of the lecture series in mind. Comparative world literatures, you drew parallels, you drew comparisons between Indian American poets, and then you talked about Mexican poets, you talked about Sarojini Naidu, then poets like Emily Dickinson, and then you get interesting poetry and also your research on poetry and women's consciousness, which we really need today. We need to talk about these things loud and clear. And then you started with stream of consciousness and consciousness, how you can take these two things as the agenda of poetry. You left nothing important actually in the lecture, like you hinted at LGBTQA poetry, religious poetry, culture, feminism, and then also gender consciousness. And questions like, is feminism basically anti men? No, it's not. That's what you pointed out. And then dream as a device. That is something that I was very interested in. And then you also discussed on slave poets from the quote unquote the black community who write race neutral literature. I would reread about these things. That how the black community poets, they also write race neutral literature, and then universal literature. I'm going to ask my colleagues and my students to read about these things. And then poems of hope in the form of Emily Dickinson. Yes, we have been teaching Emily Dickinson forever, the poems of hope. And the Sarojini Naidu's poem Sati, we will try to take it in our syllabus when we design the syllabi of many courses. For the benefit of you and Professor G.J.V. Prasad, I would like to put it here on record that through this comparative world literatures lecture series, we are creating a pool of specialized lectures and also experts like you all. I mean, we're putting them together so that we can use these lectures as a part of our upcoming MA courses from the Department of Comparative World Literatures. When we design our syllabi for many courses like MA English, MA Hindi, we already have MA Hindi, we're going to revise that. MA Translation Studies, we will revise that, it's already there. And MA in all the Indian languages, then we will try to use many of these poems through translation. And then Indian Canadian writers like Rupi Kaur, who talks about gender abuse through very short poetry. You created interest in the audiences through your presentation. I'm sure that people are going back to read her poetry. And then racism, gender identities, and then so many important and complex things, layered things that we tend to ignore sometimes when we write or interpret poetry. You pointed out these things and you compel us to go back and introspect and read about these things vis-a-vis comparative world literatures. Thank you very much for this very interesting and important and a very critical lecture. The participants will ask you questions, if at all, at the end of the lecture. And now I would request Paramita to invite Professor G.J.V. Prasad. But before that, I must put it on record here that Anita Nahal's poetry book, What's Wrong with Us, Kali Women, has created ripples in academia. People have read the poetry book very seriously. I must congratulate her for many such poetry books, and I wish her all the best for writing such powerful poetry in future as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Sahu.
Thank you, ma'am. And now I would like to introduce G.J.V. Prasad sir, who is a distinguished writer, critic, and translator, formerly a professor of English at Jawaharlal Nehru University, India. His expertise spans Indian English literature, modern drama, and translation. Notably, he has translated significant works from Tamil to English, including Umbay's A Red-Necked Green Bird in 2024, which is the collection of stories, and Imayam's A Woman Burned in 2023, a novel which is originally titled Selatha Panam. Through his work, Prasad sir contributes to the rich literary landscape of India, bridging languages and cultures. Now, I request G.J.V. Prasad sir for his captivating lecture. G.J.V. Prasad sir, please.
So, unmuted myself. Uh, Thank you, Dr. Nandini, Professor Nandini Sahu. Thank you, Paramita, if I can call you that. And thank you, Dr. Anita Nahal, for that wonderful, wonderful talk. I'm glad, and I was hoping that they'd make you speak first. And I looked at the order in the post, and I said, yes, she will be speaking first, because I wanted something useful to be said today, and you did it. And when the Vice Chancellor asked me what I was going to speak about, Actually, I blabber a few things about translation, and she was very kind in her response. But really, my lecture will be at that level of speaking off the top of my head.
But then maybe you can also quote my response.
Yes, but you already said a few very nice things about me, so I shall not repeat what you said to me
No,
Dr.
because
Prasad,
I
you
said
have
that you
so
are
much
open
knowledge in
book
your
knowledge.
mind that you don't need to prepare. People like us have to prepare.
right.
So hats off to you.
Thank you. But really, the thing is that what we heard today was a wonderful comparative reading of poetry, the kind of things that I think comparatives do and ought to do, right? And when we talk about comparative world literature, this is the kind of training that people should have. This is the kind of attitude, this is the kind of point of view that people should bring to reading any literature. Having said that, I was going to, talk about what it means, what world literature means to us, what the world means to us, first of all, right? So I'm an old fogey, right? So I remember an old song written by Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie, which was sung during a charity concert for Africa, USA for Africa. And the song went like, "We are the world, we are the people." Right. Sorry, we are the children. We are the world, we are the children. I always sung this wrongly and said people instead of children. We are the world, we are the children. The whole thing about the world having to come together at such points of time, that's what the song says. And we realize that we have to be there for each other. We have to heed this call. And it goes on to say we are part of God's one big family. Right. So the idea, the world, children, family, that we are one big family on this earth. And we said this in Sanskrit a long time ago. I'm not saying going to we said this first, but I'm saying we know Vasudeva Kudumbakam, and we say the world is a family. In Tamil, we say Yarum Ure Yavarum Keli, Yadum Ure Yavarum Keli would be every town is my town and everybody is my family. Right. But having said all this, what do we mean by what does this world mean? Is it actually ours? Whose world is it? How is it seen? How is it constructed? Where does this world come from? It is, well, I would say intuitive. It is commonsensical to think my world begins with me, that I am at the center of my world. So when I talk about things like world literature, I'm talking about my perception of world literature from my point of view. Is that the way how it works when people talk about world literature? Right? These are kind of questions. And very quickly, I'll just tell you, before I go back to a little bit about the world being a family, is that I looked at the world literature courses across various countries as just a little exercise this morning. I was going to make notes and I said, forget it. I'm not that kind of person. So I shall not set up a grid to show how different people, I just want to see how many countries are represented in these various courses. What do they talk about in this course, including in India, right? And I noticed that almost the whole world literature course is centered around Europe and then the US, and very few people and a few people from Africa who speak in English, who write in English. And not all courses have, but some courses have Indian writers. And those Indian writers are usually the ones who write in English. You'll find Rushdie, you'll find Rabindranath Tagore, because we often seen as somebody who's available in English, but basically you'll find Rushdie, you'll find Jhumpa Lahiri, you'll find newer Arundhati Roy, you'll find newer writers. You'll find in certain courses you'll find the older writers, Raja Rao, R.K. Narayan, not R.K. Narayan, Raja Rao. The whole thing of depending on what the focus is. So when they talk about world literature around the world, it is in the English Academy. Centered around translations or original writings in English. That is how world literature, and it's seen from a very beginning with a very European point of view. It goes on to a very English point of view. European point of view, you understand, right? Because when Goethe talked about world literature, he was talking about Germany, he was talking about France, he was talking about England. He, in fact, says the world, but he's actually talking about how Germany should be speaking to and listening to France and England. Right. And when he says, talks about China, he talks about the other parts of the world, he talks about China, he says, but our templates cannot come from there. We should not be studying them for our models. Our models should be the Greek. So you realize This is all of us know in the English world, English literary world, that all of us know that whenever people talk in the West used to talk about civilization, they meant the Western civilization, they meant the European civilization. They didn't mean the world civilization. So world literature, the concept comes from such a space, and therefore, when we talk about world literature, even in India, when people do world literature courses, you hardly ever see a world literature course that's 90% or 50% or 40% Asian, right? Forget even, I should not even say that, even 20% Indian. You won't find such a course easily, right? So, and that pushes me to something else, right? Which is that we we tend to take our models in the English Literary Academy, in fact, academy around the country, we tend to take our models from the West. We tend to take our templates from the West. We tend very often to duplicate or mimic or build on. I'm not saying we just do mimicking, we build on things which we take from the West. So, what it does lead us to is a kind of uh, replication which makes no sense at all. Because if you're talking about world literature, should you not be talking about world literature from where you are positioned, from where you are located, from the linguistic culture that you belong to? That's the first question that would strike anybody, anywhere in the world, I would think, but definitely in India, thinking about world literature. And how do I come to this? How do I arrive at this? Is just using common sense, and I'll carry on more with saying how and how one comes to such a position regarding how to read anything at all, right? And really, as I said, we have always maintained the world is our family, right? But if we're talking from a country where very often forget the world being a family, the family is the world. We are people who are very happy, contented with, and we find a world in our family, we find a world in a community, we find a world in a village, a town, district, state, its region. It's only finally the nation, and we're not going beyond the nation yet. And the nation itself so huge, it's so huge that if I say, oh, my world is my family, and then I say, okay, no, let's go beyond that. The family is not just my world. It's the family is my world, but then so is my region, etc., community, state, nation. By the time I reach nation, I've reached the far limits of my world. So when you're speaking about comparative literature, being comparative world literature, that's you're teaching, you have to begin somewhere. And in India, I would think that there should be comparative studies of Indian literatures, comparative Indian literature, right? And we don't talk about this. We don't really have this. I was going to talk about other stuff that I have experimented with, but let's just stay with this for the time being. That somehow we don't have departments, we don't have courses where we put together a kind of scholarship, a scholarly perspective on literatures written in Indian languages. It is difficult. I agree. But then world literature is difficult anyway, right? It is difficult because when you talk about India, you're talking about 22 languages other than English that are recognized with the Constitution. You're talking about 30s, 35, 36 languages, which are the official languages of the states and union territories of this country. You're talking about hundreds of languages which are spoken by more than 10,000 people in this country. You're talking of thousands of languages which are spoken otherwise by people, numbering less than 10,000 people per language. So when we're talking about so many languages that constitute a country, so much difference, not just in linguistic culture, but in ways of life, in cuisine, in weather conditions, in geography, in history, historical trajectory, how do you get all this together? How do you pick and choose? This is the same problem with world literature. What is the point of view that it'll take? What is the thematic? Just like Dr. Anita Nahal talking today had a very clear thematic reading position that this is what I want to read, and this is what the number of poets I'm going to select. This is how I'll do it, and they will be representing this diversity, right? So that is the kind of ways in which you have to pick and choose, but you need to have knowledge. You need to have knowledge of all these literatures. How do you have knowledge of all these literatures? You can have knowledge of all these literatures only if translations are available, only if there's a translation culture in the country, right? And really, when I go outside India, I talk about needing a translation culture in the world. But start here. We need a translation culture in this country where you would think it would be natural, that it would have always already been there. But people will talk about the epics. People say Vidava was translated to various languages, or modern Indian languages came into being with the translations of epics, etc., etc. Yeah, yes. But what is the translation culture now? And really, interestingly, and this is something that people almost say with a kind of surrender, a giving up of hope, that most of our translations, in literary translations, happen towards English in this country. So when I'm talking about reading the world from your language, from your linguistic culture, how many Indian languages are being translated into your language? How many literary texts can you read in your language, in the language you're comfortable in? Right? It's easy for us in the English Academy to kind of access. You can say, I need it in English. Yeah, I can get to the English. But what about the rest? What about the rest? And how much am I getting in English? What am I getting in English? What is, world literature is all about circulation. All of us know it, right? So what is being circulated as significant to Indian literature in this country? And then will it become part of world literature? And that's the next question. That's the next question. So most people in the world, in any case, would take the easy way out. They would pick writers like Rushdie, pick writers like Jhumpa Lahiri, who are well known, who write in English, or easily will. But Jhumpa Lahiri may say, I also write in Italian, but okay, I should write in English, and who are available in the market and recognizable, have a brand, uh, you know, uh, recognizability. So when really, I should not blame, talk negatively about world literature courses outside India. I'm just talking about how questions have to be raised about how we go around selecting. Questions to be raised, we should be raised about how why we have not encouraged or managed a good translation culture in this country, right? And we need to translate. And one of the things is talking to a university audience to say, translate, just like Dr. Anita Nahal said, write poetry. What did you write about? I would say translate. And what do you want to translate from your language into another language? What do you want to translate into your own language? Translate. And you will realize that you are actually contributing to a canon of Indian literatures, which can then contribute to the canon of world literatures when it gets translated, unfortunately, into because it needs further translation to English or other European languages. Right. When we're talking about why am I starting with Indian literatures? That, of course, is a personal story as well, right? Uh, I've been researching on and writing about Indian English literature from the mid 1980s. Dr. Anita Nahal's father, Chaman Nahal, was my teacher, and I worked with him. And so the interest in English literature came from my days in MA and MPhil in Delhi University. But my research later went really into Indian literature. That's where so from mid 80s till now, it's a long time. I've been working on Indian English literature. And when you write, anybody who's ever taught Indian English literature would have at some point said, what am I teaching? What am I actually teaching? Because Indian English literature, when I talk about it, and this is something that anybody who's heard me before knows and will be bored by, because I say Indian ? English ? Literature used to be a question mark, but no longer is. The point being that, is it Indian? How is it Indian? Is it English, or am I reading it wrong? Should it be Indian English? Is that an Indian English? These are kind of questions that arise for everybody. But by the time you finish with this, you're really saying, listen, Indian English writers and Indian literature represents India. They are talking about India. That's how they Indian. This is Anglophone writing about India, Anglophone Indian writing. So how is it Indian? What India are they portraying? So there's been a lot of contestation about this throughout. Do English writers really, are they really Indian? Are they really, etc., etc.? Can English ever represent India? Is it the right language at all? Etc., etc. Of course, I fight for English also being one of the Indian languages, also being a language that represents India. But when you're teaching, you and even you're writing, you start thinking, all right, my my India is located in other languages as well. My India has English, but also has Tamil, also has Hindi, also has Punjabi, because I'm a Delhi man. And so when I write, would these languages not come into my writing because they are part of my life? I switch languages when I'm talking. So what happens what happens to the other writers is similar. So when they write from Bengal, or when they write from Tamil Nadu or Kerala or Maharashtra or Kashmir, their languages, their linguistic cultures, that they're all nuanced. They're all very different. They're all very different. And it then pushed me to think of Indian English writers are actually translators. One can say all writers are translators, but Indian English writers are translators in the specific sense of being translating into English a lot of lived Indian experiences which are lived in other languages. So you're translators. You also make up the English as you go along. So you translate English as well, uh, which then pushes you to think about how best to read this literature would be to read it with other Indian language texts. So when I'm reading somebody writing from Karnataka, can I have access to if somebody writing contemporaneously with that writer in Kannada and talking about certain similar themes? How do they express differently? How do what freedom and what constraints do these languages give to them, right? Make on them. So what happens there? What freedoms does it give? Does writing in English allow you to do certain things, or does writing in Kannada allow you to do certain things or certain other things? So you start wanting to compare, wanting students to think about, so you do it. So this is where I feel most Indian academics teaching in India would reach very fast to bring in texts from Indian languages, to get students to think about them, to compare, because if you're teaching English, if you're getting the students are majoring in English, of course, English will be major part of this. But you will get in other language texts and get them to compare, get them to think about, and say, all right, see, English forces you to do certain things that Kannada does not force you to, the Bengali does not force you to do, right? So you talk about world of references, shared knowledge, uh, reading public, all kinds of questions then, and the market, of course, comes in always when you're talking about literatures, but all this comes in. When this comes in, you start, your other courses also change. Because if you teach a course on the English novel, you will change it to the novel and teach a person on the novel. And when you teach a course on poetry or novel or whatever, then you not only just have the English or the American or European, just Latin American, which is the kind of expansion that happens now and then, but you'd also have poets and writers from various Indian languages, where the students are located in that culture, in that literary culture, that you're saying, all right, let's bring in your Odia, let's bring in your Mewari, let's get in your languages here into the classroom. Let's get them. So your courses change. They all become comparative courses, right? An MA English is actually MA in comparative literature. And a major part, you realize, and the lacks, the deficiencies, the frustrations in such a program would be lack of translation. Is it available? Not available. So without translation, you cannot have comparative literature. So without translation, you cannot have world literature. You cannot have world literature, right? Easy way out, as I said, for people teaching world literature outside India is to simply, if they want India in the pro course, is to just take the writers who write in English. Like, for example, Rushdie famously said, didn't he, that translations are so poor from Indian languages. He almost sounded like Macaulay when he said things written in English are far better than all that's been written in Indian languages. And I don't think he meant to sound like Macaulay, but that's what he sounded like when he said that. And that's because he was also commenting about the quality of translation. And this is one of the problems that people will have and outside India, who are not specialized in any Indian language or literature. They would have a problem of saying, how do I gauge quality? Right? How do I accept this translation over the where is the scholarship? Where is the scholarship that tells me that this is a translation you should be looking at? It isn't there because you're not doing it. So when I'm talking to students and you have a future, I'm saying, this is all, we have left it to you. We have left so many things to the next generation in this world, including pollution, take care of pollution, take care of the climate. I'm also saying, take care of our literary culture, right? Take care of academics. If when we talk about literature, we talk about I also like to bring in questions of society and how societies are made, because without translation, you really don't have an India. Without translation, not we are not equal citizens in this country. Without every legal text, without the constitution itself being available in all Indian languages, we're not citizens, equal citizens. There is no equality, there's no equity in this country without translation. So translation is such a significant activity for the country and for the world that I'm surprised that we still lag so far behind in our translation, in our focus on translation. Uh, this business of, sorry, I'm just looking at a few points that I said I must get through in 20 minutes. I haven't managed to, but I will try. Okay, let me throw the points away because I don't think I can cover all the points in the
No,
time.
no, no, please take your time. Please
No, no,
complete all the points. We are listening, please.
it's okay. It
It's
doesn't
okay.
matter. I
So
didn't be
we have
coherent. I'm just going for coherence now. Those are incoherently written points. So, uh, right. So I was talking about, a Tamil writer once asked me. Uh, he said, will I ever be translated into other Indian languages? And I said, why not? And he said, I don't know. Who reads Tamil? He asked me, who reads Tamil? And I said, listen, now all your writers are going all around the world. You're going to every literary festival. Translations are happening and into English, into French, into other European languages, into some East European languages as well. Interesting translations are happening. He said, yeah, but 2 or 3 people, right? I said, okay, 2 or 3 people. And he said, so Tamil literature and writers like me will not be known even in this country, outside the state, outside the state. So I said, look, what can I do? This is the state. This is how we are, right? We are in a country, as I said, where the constitution is not available in all the languages recognized by the constitution. Forget other languages. Forget languages which are spoken by 10,000 people. Forget everything else. Just the 22 languages that the constitution recognizes. So we are in a country like that, which does not have a translation culture or even an understanding of what translations do to keep a country, to make a country, to make a world, to make everybody feel part of the family, right? So going back to Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson, the question that arises when he says, okay, we are the world where people gods, but who's God? Who's God's big family, right? World should come together. What is the world that is coming together? Are you thinking of the whole world? Are you thinking of just your part of the world that we should come together to help others? Uh, are the others part of your world? Are they also singing along with you? And if they're not, then what is your world? Right? This business of what is your world is at the center of reading world literature, I would say, and I would think. What is your world? What are you comparing? What are the points of view you're taking? And how are you bringing in and expanding consciousness of the whole world into your classroom, into your syllabus, into your readings, and actually making it almost so much part of ways of reading that even people who are not in academia, even people who just read stuff or access stuff online, because should be able to read things together, see themselves as part of this whole world. And really, in the world of the World Wide Web, internet, we should all feel together, feel as part of it. We get information from everywhere so fast. We can read any number of writers online. We should feel as part of this of a world, of one world, right? And people tell me, literary writer, and this is within quotation marks because there are all kinds of writers, but writers who write what is called literary writings. It's an interesting terminology because others don't, which is funny. Everybody writes, in any case, but they are more aware of other writers everywhere. But that's not true. I mean, if you're a writer of romance, if you're a writer of detective fiction, if you're a writer of any kind of genre fiction, I'd be very aware of everybody else in the world too. All of us are aware. It's a connected world. It's a connected world. It's like people saying that Indian writers are not influenced by world literatures. Of course they are. Of course they are. Right? Of course, Tamil writers know the Latin American writers. Of course, Tamil writers know Polish writers. They know. And so when I'm talking about, you realize when I'm talking about Indian writers, I'm bringing in the world anyway from outside, because world and India are not separate from each other. They've always been influencing each other, right? All countries, all nations, all peoples, all literary cultures have influenced each other and are continuing to influence each other. It should be easy. It should be easy to bring this consciousness into the classroom. But is it done? Is it done? That's the question. And it doesn't need one special course to do it. It can be done with every course, with every reading, and must be done. I'm sorry if it sounded non-scholarly, but this is how I sound. And which is why I say I'm so glad I came in last today as the second speaker, because what Dr. Anita and Nahal did was to showcase, to show what I'm talking about. That's how it should be done. Right. And if you can do that, because when you heard Anita Nahal, I'm sure many of you are thinking of other poets, of other writings, and thinking I could read them together like this. They would have also could have formed part of the talk. That's it. That's the consciousness that you bring in, that you may provoke people to think. Right. So thank you. Thank you for listening to me so patiently. Thank you for threatening others by trying to give me more time. Please know they've been bored enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for such an informative and engaging lecture. Now, I would like to request Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am for her very important remarks. Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am.
Thank you so much, Professor G.J.V. Prasad. In fact, after Professor G.J.V. speaks, all other voices need to be silenced. But still, I have the audacity, I would say, to give some of my comments on the lecture that he delivered. Uh, two very different lectures were delivered in this session. Anita Nahal, she compared very unusual voices, poets practically taking names and quoting their poetry. She actually compared very, very unique and very different poets, and that was her perspective, very, very personal, of course. And Professor G.J.V. Prasad gave us so many questions. The first lecture of this series was delivered by Professor Anishur Rahman, who asked a question: who all should you compare and what all should you compare? And I think Professor G.J.V. Prasad resonated with the similar kind of a thing when he said the world and India are not one and the same. They are so different from each other. And also when he emphasized that translation is a significant equity and the syllabi of very many universities should take translation as a part of them. Sir, I'm glad to inform you here that Hindi University, where we are having this lecture series, has a department of translation studies. And the teachers like Dr. Paramita, and many of them are teachers from the translation studies department, and they are multilingual. They are fluent in English, in Hindi, in Bangla, and many other languages. So, it gives me so much encouragement when I talk to these people that they are multilingual, they are fluent, they speak flawlessly without grammatical errors, and that in those languages that they are using, unlike many other parts of the world. And then the translation studies department students are also doing very well. Last week, some of the seniors, the alumni, some of them came to me to inform that they have been appointed as Rajbhasha Adhikari in central government positions after doing MA in translation studies with us. And I was so happy for that. But then I recommended the faculty that they should convert the MA translation studies to multiple entry and exit option courses like a certificate in translation studies for 6 months, a diploma in translation studies PGDT for 1 year, so that people who do MA in translation studies and that there is no UGC net examination in translation studies, so they face problems related to employment. So translation studies still is treated, as an appendix to so many other courses, so many other programs like MA English or MA Hindi or any other language programs. Translation just comes as something related to those courses, and there is no separate UGC net examination in translation studies. And immediately I wrote a letter to the UGC and that we should introduce translation studies as a part of our UGC net examination, so that universities like us who are offering MA in translation studies should encourage the students to go for those net examinations, and then we should create employment for them. But having said that, I would give you a very positive information here that our students are placed as Rajbhasha Adhikari. They are translating between the languages. And when you said that your friend asked you who reads Tamil, I was reminded about someone from Odisha who said who reads Odia. Recently, I was invited as a chief guest in some function in Odisha, where I told them in the beginning itself that my contribution to Odia literature is not by writing Odia poetry. I have never written poetry in Odia or stories in Odia or anything in Odia, but my contribution to Odia literature is through translation and designing courses. Like most eminent writers and also young writers from Odisha have been included by me in many programs like MA Folk Literature. In MA Comparative Literature, I have included Odia writers through translation. Look at Manoj Das or Sitakan Mahapatra, Ramakant Rathar, Jayant Mahapatra, or Pratibha Ray, many of them, and also the new voices. I have included many of them in our comparative literature courses and MA folk literature, MA tribal literature courses. So when I said that my lecture for 1.5 hours was over, then this person he raises his hand and he says, Professor, I have a question for you. I said, yes. He says, please read one of your poems in Odia. I said, probably you did not listen to me. In the beginning, I said that I have never written a poem in Odia, I have never written a story in Odia. But the way I have engaged myself with Odia literature through translation, pedagogy, and course designing, it's something that at least I should be given a little credit. But still, the gentleman was not willing to listen to me. He criticized me for not writing a poem in Odia. So this is the scenario in one side. The other side of the coin is many people think translation as a second fiddle to the mainstream activity. They don't consider translation to be very very prestigious. In this kind of a situation, when you say that universities should offer more courses on translation studies, I'm very happy to inform you here that we are going to design 22 MA courses and then another 23rd and 22 MA courses in various Indian languages approved by the Constitution, by the Parliament, and also another will be MA in English, and then 6 foreign languages MA courses, and then MA folk literature and MA tribal literature. It's a very ambitious plan I have. I've already submitted the proposal and I have got the green signals from the authorities of this state, where the primary concern would be comparative literature. For example, MA in Tamil. I will definitely invite you to help me to design the syllabus in MA in Tamil, in MA in English, and many other courses that you have the specialization of the expertise, where comparative literature will be the key. The theorization will be comparison. Like Tamil literature may be compared to some other Indian literatures and some other world literatures through research and through poetry, through drama, through whatever you recommend. So comparative literature and translation will be the soul of the courses that we are designing here. And for that, I will definitely need help of experts like you. From your lecture, I just jotted down a few points quickly. I will tell you. The big question of representation that you talked about, I have jotted it down. I would have some more discussion on this, the question of representation. And then beyond Eurocentrism in comparative world literature, provincializing Europe and a little bit of Africa, yes, I will rethink about it when we read comparative world literature courses from other universities. Is it totally Eurocentric or little bit of Africa is there and no other country is there? I will be keen and I will be careful to look at this when we design our courses. All thanks to you for creating this awareness in me and all of us. And then you talked about translation as epistemological encounter, not just linguistic transfer. Certainly, sir. Thank you so much. And the politics of equivalence and fidelity. And then you critiqued the dominance of fluency in Indian American translation. And then you advocated for foreignization. Probably this is what I understood. I may be wrong. And then you talked about training the trainers and what are the comparatists ought to do. Yes, we are comparatists, or we claim that we are comparatists, and what are the things that we need to do, and what are the things we need to train ourselves with us? We'll think about that. And then this interesting concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam vis-a-vis comparative world literature is something is very, very beautiful. Thanks a lot. And then the question, how many countries should be represented in our university? I will only think about Hindi University. Then like Rushdie or the Roy, Jhumpa Lahiri, and very few Indian writers or diaspora writers have been taken in the syllabus. We will reconsider that. We will try to take as many writers as possible. And it's very alarming that hardly 20% Indian is there in comparative literature courses. It definitely is alarming. We will certainly think about it. The curious question is the world a family or family is the world? Only you can talk like this, so witty that you are. So I think about it. And let's start with the comparative studies of Indian literatures department and literatures written in Indian languages. Then slowly we can go to the foreign literatures. You also talked about life, historical trajectory, cuisine, languages and literature. And then you talked about knowledge of the literatures through translation, and then untranslatability, Emily Apter's notion. I was thinking about that. Can everything be translated between Indian languages? I think yes. And the tension and the friction between world literatures was something that you hinted at. And then translation in the body, gender, caste, identity, marginalized voices in translingual world and transregional circuits, and the canon of comparative world literature through translation. These are some of the very, very interesting and important things that you pointed out. I have written so much when you were talking. I have written 4 to 5 pages, but I'm not going to talk everything here. Otherwise, it's going to be my lecture, not yours. But certainly, I will get in touch with you, both of you, when we design the syllabi of all these courses of comparative world literature departments. Thanks a lot for this very, very important lecture, and I thoroughly enjoyed. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for our very valuable and wonderful participants. So I request them, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask now, or you might mail us to our mail address that I already shared in the chat box. Um, is there anyone who would like to ask question now? Okay. Okay, so I think they might send it to our mail. And thank you. And as we have come to the end of our such an engaging webinar lecture series, and so I would like to thank Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am, Dr. Anita Nahal ma'am, and G.J.V. Prasad sir, and all the participants for joining us today. Thank you and namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you so much, Professor G.J.V and Professor Anita. Namaste.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.